Good morning. It's Thursday, April the 9th, and we're a couple weeks away from the end of the semester. So hang in there, and when we're getting there, and thanks for continuing to take this seriously and to kind of stay engaged and stay with it with me. So last week we looked at risk management and things like waivers and emergency action plans. And there is some detail here. And I kind of asked you for some of that detail in your reading notes. So, there are some standard elements of waivers and of emergency action plans that need to be there, or they're incomplete. They might not hold up in court, for example. And before I talk about both of those, one of the first questions I asked you was to talk about some of the risks that were involved in your specific activity. And some of you gave me risks that were specific to the activity. For example, if you had a baseball event, you talked about batted or thrown objects, hazards of a playing field, hazards related to heat and, heat and children. And then some of you didn't have an actual sport activity. Some of you had like a special dinner or kids' day, or something where it was more like you hosted a gathering, and it was still sport related, but you weren't playing an actual sport. And that's very relevant too. We do a lot of that in sports. And there are still risks too. So, I had a couple of you say, well, there aren't any risks. But there still are. Anytime you have an event, even if it's just people sitting in chairs at dinner, they're still in your care during that time. And there are things like fire or tornado or a personal emergency. Someone could have a heart attack or an allergic reaction or fall down the stairs. So, that happens all the time in events where people are spectators and not necessarily action-oriented, but people are in your care and they are in your facility. And so you're responsible for being aware of those types of emergencies that can happen anytime and how we're going to react to those in the facility. So, I loved seeing both the combination of risks that were specific to your particular activity and then some of those more general risks that we see in any facility, such as fire, severe weather, personal health emergency, disruptive behavior. So that was primarily question number 2. Question number 2 in your reading notes also asked you to come up with a waiver for your event. And I asked you to surf around online, find some examples. And in the course material, we talked about some elements that are essential to a waiver holding up in court. For example, a very important part of a waiver is for you to disclose all of the potential risks that you can feasibly think of in that waiver. We have to educate the participant. We have to disclose what those risks are. And, that's what makes a waiver long, because it's kind of the stuff that goes on and on about, risks inherent to volleyball camp are things like sprains, strains, broken bones, lacerations, collisions with others, collisions with the floor. And so, I was asking you to give me all of those. And you can see examples of those in waivers that you looked up online, but it's our job to warn participants of all of the possible things that we can foresee that might happen. And sure, there are bizarre things that can happen that we can't foresee, but if we're being prudent and responsible sport managers, we have to tell our participants those risks that we do know, so that the participant can make an informed decision of whether they participate or not. Now that you have told me all of these risks, I can make a responsible and informed decision if I can accept those risks, or if I think it's too dangerous, and then I'll say thanks but no thanks. So those are 2 important parts of a waiver, and if I didn't see you kind of elaborate on some of those risks, then we're not really doing our job as sport managers to disclose all of those potential risks to participants. So that's a really important part of a waiver, and I took some points if I didn't see that elaboration of those risks. And then question number 3 asked you to go through an emergency action plan, or EAP, for your particular event. And I included an example in the course content, and I'm going to see if I can attach another example to this video message that I found in an intramural handbook. And the EAP has very specific protocol for the various emergency types. So, when protocol for a fire is different from protocol for a tornado, for example, which is also different from protocol for a disruptive participant, like an active shooter, or a health emergency, or somebody falling off of the upper deck of a stadium seating. So, often in sports, you'll see it. We'll see it this season once we get sports back again. We'll see an incident where somebody had a health emergency or fell off of a railing or something in the building failed and caused injury. And the first questions that they ask when they investigate those incidents is, what was the emergency action plan? What was it? Was it up to date? Was it thorough enough? And how well was it followed? Were staff trained to follow it? Did they follow it? Or were pieces left out that put the participant in even more danger or made it worse? So in any kind of investigation of an incident, those are going to be the elements where that investigation will decide how liable that facility is for the response to that particular event. And, by now we know that fires happen, tornadoes happen, heart attacks happen, falls from upper decks in stadiums happen. Therefore, if we can foresee that, it is our job to have a very detailed plan and response for that. So, I was looking for that level of detail in your EAP. And a lot of those, you can find a lot of those online. And I had an example in the course content. So that's the level of detail I was looking for. And also kind of the diversity of incidents that can happen that require different responses. So one of my favorite things that I saw in one of the reading notes were some of you listed all of the exits to your facility. That was great. Or like driving directions, if there were multiple entrances or directions into your facility, the different ways that you could get in. Oftentimes, if an ambulance just Googles your address on a map, they don't know the best way to go in. So, for example, at the rec center at the U of A, we couldn't get an ambulance to the second or first floors. We had to send the ambulance to the third floor, which was a different address. So we had to know all of the different addresses to that building because an ambulance could only come to the third floor. That was the only place where there was a wide enough access and a ramp to get an ambulance right up to the door. So anyway, I thought that was a really nice touch to some of your reading notes, where kind of a breakdown of the different entrances and access points and exits. So, okay. So this Friday we have the second task progress form in your event administration assignment. And I know this is going to be redundant and maybe kind of boring and tedious to some of you, especially if you've already talked about cancellations. We're just going to do the best we can with this. If it's redundant, that's fine. If you're still dealing with kind of some of those tedious tasks with cancellations, like what are we going to do with all the extra t-shirts? Or people are still calling for refunds, or we still haven't decided when to reschedule yet because we're waiting for this. That's just kind of some of the boring stuff that exists when you have to cancel an event. Part of the unfun thing I think about sport event administration is dealing with a lot of the follow-up. For example, I always mention the intramural 10K. And I get this huge sense of release when it's over. But then when it's over, I have to do a lot of follow-ups, like thanking the sponsors, emailing people the results, double-checking the results, making sure that all the trash got picked up from the dumpster downstairs, even a week later, thanking any of my volunteers, doing any follow-ups with any volunteers and thanking them. So you may still be working on some of those things. They're small, they're kind of tedious details, but they're still important. They're part of the follow-ups that make sure that we keep everybody happy and willing to come back and either volunteer or work or participate or buy tickets for next year. And just dealing with the little stuff that we've got to either put away or clean up or rebudget for next year. So any of those little things that you can think of is kind of what I'm looking for in that. So that is tomorrow. So everybody have a good weekend, and we'll keep on trucking, and thanks for your attention and your work.